We have another amazing guest and show for you today. Artificial intelligence is reshaping the legal profession and influencing how every company manages risk and decision making. Today's guest knows this all too well and has created the Iron Man model for working through the new normal. Welcome to the Tech and Space Leaders Show, where we learn lessons from leaders of the next frontier. I am your host, Lisa Dreher, and I'm really excited to introduce our guest for today, Bennett Borden. He is the CEO of Clarion AI Partners. Welcome to the show, Bennett.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm delighted to be here.
Absolutely. Can we start by having you give a little bit of background on yourself and Clarion AI Partners?
Sure. So I am a lawyer, a data scientist, and an AI ethicist. And I became a data scientist kind of by accident. I was at university over in England where I'd put together my own degree studying turning points in history. How do societies form themselves? Why, how do they respond to ecological or economic pressures? But focusing especially on technological revolutions, everything from the wheel, the saddle, gunpowder, all the way up to the second industrial revolution, and how it changed societies, but how it changed the relationship between governments and citizens and labor and capital and all of those things. And this was back in the early 90s. And um, I got recruited by the CIA to come work in a data analytics shop. And I'm like, that doesn't sound, that sounds really cool, but I don't really know anything about data. And I'm not really great at math. I hate statistics and I failed calculus. And they're like, yeah, we know all that. What we want you for is, if you kind of remember what was going on in the early 90s, was the World Wide Web, and email was just coming out of academia. The cell phones were just coming on the market. And so we were creating for the first time a really personalized digital contrail. And the agency rightfully saw that contrail was only going to become richer and more voluminous. And so my job was to help see what we could learn about movements and societies based on this digital contrail. So could we understand their behavior, predict their behavior, or influence their behavior, which is what every social media company, cookie, everything does now. But at the time, it was pretty cool science. So I worked there for 8 years, really working with some of the world's leading data analysts and machine learning specialists and things like that. But I always wanted to go to law school, so went on to Georgetown Law, and then to NYU for a graduate degree in data analytics. And so my career has always been kind of at this intersection of law, data, and technology. Spent all of my career kind of in big law in one of the top 10 firms in the world, and was there when Gen AI came out, and got to work with those companies, and came to really understand that we are at this essential tipping point in human history, that there literally has never been a technology as impactful as this, at least since electricity, much more than the computer or the internet or things that people, analogs that people make. It is much more transformative than that. And so decided to leave big law, take some of my team, and build Clarion, where we do nothing but AI law. So we give advice to our clients on how do you deal with these big questions around AI, especially with regulation kind of being all over the place and still fluid. And but we specialize in AI strategy. So like, how do you bring AI into your company to transform it, to really, we call it superseding your company, and still make it human centered and human flourishing. But then, as you said, we are also a development shop, and so we actually help clients build AI based solutions, everything down from little knowledge agent bots to big multi agent orchestrated systems. So we're living at the very cutting edge of AI, both in public policy and technology.
Wow. Oh my gosh. What an amazing career. And you were just right on the cusp as all of this was beginning and now continuing that. When you look at the current situation with the law and AI, how would you describe it and how has that changed over the last couple of years?
So it's really very interesting, and there's two kind of aspects to that question. One is the law itself, and so the law is always behind what we can do technologically in the world, right? The law tends to be a little reactive to developing situations. And so, like one of the analogies is when cars first started being made, and our primary method of transportation was horses. There weren't laws about how horses and cars interacted, right? Like, or who has the right of way or whatever, right? And so, the law had to develop, and the faster the pace of technological change, the larger the distance we get between where the law is and what we can do, and we are at a big distance right now. And so you see the conflict between the federal government and the states in the U.S. You see changes in philosophy around the EU AI Act, and as other countries are considering how to regulate AI, because it is moving so quickly, the fastest progressing technology literally ever invented, that the best we can do is kind of guidelines and liability and defining those things. But it's really going to be up to industries and companies on how they will govern AI. The other side of it is on the practice of law. So, one of the reasons I decided to leave Big Law was I realized that Gen AI is an existential threat to how we practice law today. Study after study has shown that at least 80 to 90% of what a lawyer does today is better done by AI. And the throwing bodies at a problem and charging by the hour is just, that model is dead. And so the flip side of that, though, is a law firm that uses the incredible power of AI, that captures the acumen and the experience and the wisdom of the law, and you as a lawyer can be a 22nd century law firm. So at the perfect age of 57 years old, I decided to leave the pinnacle of my career and start this law firm of the future.
Right, right. So, thinking about that, how should business leaders today be thinking about the legal risks associated with an environment where AI systems are operational, in operational use?
So there's just some basics, right? So there's just about every company is using some off-the-shelf large AI-based system. So think Copilot or ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity, pick your model. And one, have good policies in place about what tools you can use and what tools you can't use. Make sure you're using an enterprise license level version. If people are using the free version of these, the consumer facing free versions of these apps, there's very little protections around privacy. The famous Silicon Valley mantra: if you're not paying for the product, you are the product, right? And so your data is being used to train the model, and the confidentiality is much less protected. But on the personal level, a paid subscription, you get many more protections. And at the enterprise level, you should just simply have an enterprise level license. And that way you get all of the protections that you would with any other SaaS based system. And it's just as safe and just as unsafe as any other cloud based system. The advice that we give is that these broad based AI tools, kind of unleashed on your company, will people will find really great ways to use them. And so you'll get these efficiency gains, 20, 30% sometimes in just about everything that you do. The problem is that these tools are available for everybody. And so you get kind of a first mover advantage, but then everybody kind of catches up. And when everybody's special, nobody's special. And so the real transformative power of these technologies is when you build versus buy. It's so easy to build an agent these days, but it's understanding, and this is where this Iron Man analogy comes in, right? We always say, think Iron Man, not the Terminator, right? You're not going to unplug a person and plug in a bot and take over their job. It's just not how it works. But like with the lawyers, 80% of what we do is better done by AI. But that 20% is utterly, essentially human. And so figuring out what your company does, right? Like you do, every company does stuff and they do that stuff in a series of steps. And some of those steps are better done by AI and some are better done by humans. So figuring out which is which and building point solutions for what AI can do best and surround it with the right controls and the human in the loop and all of that. And all of a sudden you take the secret sauce of your company and supersede it and augment and extend what you're able to do today and to create entirely new products and services.
Amazing. Okay, so where do you even start to build your own AI agents and things like that? What is that process?
So it all comes down to what business problem you're trying to solve. So like when we work with companies, the first thing we do is what we call a discovery sprint, where we come in and kind of take apart the company, talk to the head leader, the leaders of each function, middle management, the kind of the frontline trench workers, right? To figure out what it is they do, how do they do it, what kind of steps do they have, and where AI can be the most useful. And then it becomes it is really very simple to take the what distinguishes you as a company and build those into an agentic system or a multi-agentic system, because every company has artifacts of its acumen, whether that is in your data. Everybody has data they keep forever, that's lying around. And then the acumen and the minds of your experienced great people. And what's amazing about these agents is you can take data, well curated pockets of data. You can point a model at it. You can control that model perfectly. So, one of the things that shocks CEOs when I talk to them is I say, you can control the behavior of AI perfectly. And they're like, I've seen all the headlines. There's where they go crazy. I'm like, that's because they didn't control it the right way. But you can, and completely defensively. And then the amazing thing about this technology is you can take the experience and the judgment of humans and put it into the psychology of these agents. And I use that term very specifically. These are not things you program, they're not code that you write. It is, you are literally forming the psychology and the behavior of these agentic systems. And so, because of that, you can take the acumen that is in someone's head and put it into the acumen of a bot. And then with all, again, the quality control and the right checks, but then all of a sudden you've got a super suit for every person in your company.
Amazing. Okay. What have you seen, though, are the most common misconceptions within companies that are looking to really leverage AI?
So there's a couple that I run into all the time working with some of the world's leading CEOs. One is that if you just unleash these big, multi kind of general purpose tools, it will somehow the company will transform itself. It needs more direction and strategy than that. The other is that CEOs, I talk to them and they're like, I feel such pressure to do something with AI. The board, the competition, like I've got to do something with AI, but I don't even know how to think about it. And I'm like, of course you do. Every company does stuff, right? And they do it in an industry that has a legal rubric, it has an industry standard, it has, common practices. And so you're not starting with whole cloth here, right? If you introduce AI into a workflow, what you're looking for is how does that change my risk profile and how can I reasonably mitigate it? And this brings us back to the point of where the law is, because the law is very fluid and unsettled, and it's going to stay that way for a number of years. It's just that's the world we're dealing in. When that happens, you can always fall back on this bedrock principle in the law of reasonableness. And so many people have heard of like the reasonable person standard or the reasonable company standard, which says what would a reasonable and average company do based on the information they had at the time. Well, what that means with AI is if you're introducing AI in a way that touches the world, whether your employees or customers or whatever, what reasonably foreseeable risks did you introduce? What did you do to reasonably mitigate those risks? And this is what always people forget. How could you prove it? And so what we've learned is that the best way to control AI is with AI. So when we build an agent right beside it whose job it is to oversee the functioning of the first agent, right? And you build compliance by design. You've already got controls in place. You've already got policies and things that you measure and report on. Well, those are the things that you build into the psychology or the functioning of these bots. And you can build in sensors, for lack of a better term, that spit out metrics that prove that the system is functioning exactly like it was intended. And those metrics depend on what regulatory space you're in, what best practice, what ethics, whatever it is. But you can, once that you unlock that understanding in a CEO, then you can unlock that understanding and how to innovate with AI throughout the company.
Knowing this, what should leaders be doing today within their organizations to ensure that they are ready for the next phase of AI as this continues to progress so quickly?
One is understand that you must do something with AI, that it is an almost miraculously transformative technology that advances in education and healthcare and in material science in so many different areas is astonishing. And if you aren't putting a great deal of thought behind how you can bring AI into your company, you will simply cease to exist. One of the if you look at the list of the 100 top companies before the second industrial revolution and the 100 top companies afterwards, there's only 3 or 4 companies that are on that list, both lists. And it's
Yeah.
because leaders tend to just spend too much time defending how they have historically been successful. And so you become a Kodak, you become a Xerox, right? We've all heard, those stories of people who were way ahead and then fell behind. And so starting today, thinking about what is it we do as a company? How can I define what I do in a series of steps? What steps do I do to create my product or service? And across all those functions, and then start to bring an understanding of which of those steps are optimizable and which of those steps are human. And then how do you integrate those things? Because it is the integration of what AI can do with what is essentially human judgment, compassion, experience, right? These things that the AI cannot do. It's integrating those things to create entirely new and more powerful products and services. But start today thinking about how you could do that for your company.
Oh my gosh. Okay, great advice. If someone wanted to learn more about Clarion AI Partners, what should they do?
Feel free to see our website, clarionai.com. Please feel free to reach out to me personally, Bennett.Borden at clarionailaw.com. We talk to executives and just anybody all the time. One of our mantras is AI for good and AI for all. And so we're happy to have conversations, whether that leads to a project or not. We are very interested in furthering human flourishing through AI.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for making time to be here today. This has been an incredibly valuable conversation, and I know that our audience is going to be very thankful that they checked in to listen to this.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It was an absolute delight to be here.
Absolutely my pleasure, and I would love to take a moment to thank GuideForce for hosting these sessions. To learn more about GuideForce, you can visit guideforce.com. And we'll see you next time on the Tech and Space Leaders Show.